Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita. Okay, so, are you ready to dive into something I've been thinking about a lot lately?
Always up for a good deep dive. What's on your mind?
The role of nuance in sociological theory. It's something that seems to pop up everywhere,
Yeah, definitely. It's a big topic.
So we're going deep with this article, Fuck Nuance, by Kieran Healy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pretty provocative title, right?
You can say that again. Gets your attention for sure.
Definitely not your typical academic paper. This sociologist does not hold back.
So where was this published?
In Sociological Theory, back in 2017.
Okay, so not exactly brand new, but still very relevant, I bet.
Oh, absolutely. It really gets to the core of how we understand and explain the world, which, that's relevant to all of us, right?
Absolutely. Not just for academics.
So we're going to unpack Healy's argument, try to figure out why he thinks nuance is such a problem, and see if you agree with his pretty bold stance.
Sounds fascinating. I'm in.
All right, so first things first. What are we even talking about when we say nuance? What does Healy actually mean by that?
Yeah, good point. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot.
Exactly. He uses this term, actually existing nuance. And it's not just about being subtle or recognizing complexity.
It's more than that.
Yeah, he's talking about this kind of, unnecessary complexity. Adding complexity for no real reason or benefit.
I think I see where he's going with this. It's like when someone says, well, it's complicated, as a way to avoid giving a straight answer,
Yes, exactly. It's that feeling you get when you're in a discussion and someone just keeps piling on more and more layers, but it doesn't actually clarify anything.
Right, it just muddies the waters. Healy is not saying that all distinctions are bad or that we shouldn't think carefully about things. It's more about this kind of unconstrained demand for more and more nuance.
Even when it doesn't add any value to the conversation, and it's not just a feeling, Healy actually has data to back this up. The word nuance has skyrocketed in top sociology journals since the 1980s.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so it makes you wonder, right? Is this nuance explosion a good thing? Is it leading to better understanding or just more confusion?
It's an interesting question. Maybe it reflects broader changes in how we think about knowledge and expertise these days. Maybe we've become more skeptical of simple explanations, or maybe we just love to complicate things. Who knows?
Maybe. And that leads us to Healy's nuance traps.
Okay, nuance traps. Tell me more.
These are the sneaky ways that nuance can trip us up. He outlines 3 of them, and I have a feeling you've probably encountered at least one of these in your own work.
Okay, lay it on me. What's the first trap?
So the first one is the nuance of the fine grain. It's when you get so caught up in the tiny little details that you totally lose sight of the bigger picture.
Oh, I've definitely been there. Spending weeks researching something only to realize it was a total dead end. It didn't actually move my understanding of the issue forward at all.
Exactly. You're so focused on examining each individual tree that you miss the entire forest. And Healy's saying that while that fine grain detail can be important, it shouldn't be the goal in itself.
I see. So it's about balance, knowing when to zoom in and when to zoom out.
Exactly. Okay, so the second nuance trap, this is where things can get really messy, is the nuance of the conceptual framework. Have you ever come across these massive, really huge theories where everything seems to be connected?
Oh, yeah, all the...
But it's almost impossible to tell what they're actually explaining.
It's every factor is supposedly important, but the theory itself is so unwieldy and complex that you can't really test it or challenge it. It's just there.
Yeah, exactly. And Healy's suggesting that these overly complex frameworks can actually stifle new ideas and make it harder to make real progress.
It's they create this barrier to entry for anyone who wants to contribute something new.
Right, because you're so intimidated by this giant, impenetrable theory. I wonder if this applies to everyday conversations too. Have you ever been in an argument with someone where they throw in so many nuances and caveats that you don't even know where to begin to disagree?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
It becomes less about genuine discussion and more about building a wall around your argument so no one can get through.
Right. Okay, and finally, we get to nuance trap number 3. And I have to admit, this one hits a little close to home for me. The nuance of the connoisseur. It's like that wine snob who throws out all these fancy terms and tasting notes, but you feel like you need a dictionary just to understand what they're talking about.
Oh, yeah. We've all met that person.
Yeah.
They just love to complicate things, maybe to make themselves sound smarter.
Exactly. And Healy describes this trap as using nuance as a way to show off your intelligence, right? Creating this barrier to entry for anyone who hasn't spent years and years studying the subject.
It makes knowledge feel exclusive instead of inviting and accessible.
Yeah. Right. So we've got these 3 nuance traps that Healy identifies, and it really makes you wonder, could he be right? Is nuance actually the enemy of good theory?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I guess that's what we're going to unpack next. So
Yeah.
is nuance really the enemy of good theory? That's what we're trying to figure out, right?
Right. And Healy's argument is that all this nuance can actually get in the way of developing good theories, like strong theories that you can actually test.
Because you can't test something if it's too wishy-washy and you can't get to the core of it.
Exactly. He thinks it hinders our ability to abstract, to see the core idea behind something.
Instead of pushing an idea forward and seeing how far it goes,
Yeah.
we get stuck in this loop of just adding more and more qualifications.
Right. So it never really moves forward. And this connects to something we all experience, those aha moments when you suddenly understand something complex. They often come from simplifying things, right? Finding that core idea beneath all the clutter.
Totally. I mean, think about those times when you're trying to explain something to someone.
Oh.
If you overload them with all these details and caveats, they're just going to get lost.
Yeah, for sure.
But if you can find a simple, clear way to convey the main point, that's when understanding happens.
I feel like Healy is kind of saying that nuance, while it can be valuable in some cases, can also be a strategic disadvantage.
Yeah, like for a whole field of study even.
Yeah, like for sociology as a whole.
He worries that this obsession with nuance might be holding sociology back from having a wider impact.
Yeah.
Like in public discourse or policy debates.
And he uses the example of economists like Gary Becker,
Oh yeah, Becker.
whose models have been super influential, even though they're often criticized for being overly simplistic.
Right.
Healy's point is that sometimes a clear message can be more effective than a super nuanced one, even if it's not perfectly accurate in every detail.
That makes me think of all those successful marketing campaigns.
Oh, yeah.
That take these complex ideas and boil them down into these catchy slogans that everyone remembers.
Or even just think about trying to convince a friend to try a new restaurant. Sometimes just highlighting 1 or 2 key things is way more persuasive than giving them this whole breakdown of the entire menu.
Absolutely. And this brings us back to Healy's, his very provocative statement, fuck nuance.
It's definitely attention grabbing.
Yeah, it's meant to be.
It's definitely meant to make us stop and think, is he being too extreme? Is he totally dismissing the value of nuance?
It's a good question to ask. But I think even if you don't agree with how he says it, Healy's article raises some really important questions.
Like, what are we even doing with all this nuance?
Exactly. Is it genuinely helping us understand things better, or were we just using it to sound smart?
Are we adding all this complexity because it's truly necessary, or are we just trying to avoid criticism? It's almost like Healy's article is a call to action,
It is.
to be more deliberate about how we use nuance, to make sure it's actually serving a purpose.
To recognize that sometimes simplicity can be more powerful than complexity.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot where we acknowledge that the world is complex, but we still strive for clarity and understanding.
I like that, finding the sweet spot.
Healy's focus here is on the field of sociology, but I think this conversation is relevant to anyone who deals with complex ideas and wants to make sense of the world.
I think you're right.
It's about recognizing that clarity and precision are just as important as depth and sophistication.
Sometimes you have to strip away some of those layers to really see what's going on.
Exactly. So as you continue thinking about this, I want you to consider Healy's challenge here.
Okay.
Take a look at your own field or your area of interest and ask yourself, how much does nuance play a role?
Is it helping? Or is it hindering progress?
Is it leading to more clarity, or is it obscuring the core ideas? It's interesting to think about some of history's most influential thinkers. They often had this knack for making really complex ideas seem simple.
Yeah, like they could cut through all the noise and get to the heart of something.
Right, and communicate these really complex arguments clearly, make them accessible, without losing the depth.
I mean, take Albert Einstein, for example.
Oh, yeah, perfect example.
His theory of relativity totally changed how we understand, the universe, right? Mm-hmm. Space and time.
Right.
But he was also amazing at explaining it in a way that, normal people could understand.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder, is being able to simplify a sign of truly understanding something. I think that's what makes Healy's argument so interesting. He's not saying we should dumb things down or avoid complexity.
No, not at all.
He's just pushing us to be more aware of how we're using nuance and to make sure it's actually serving a purpose.
Like, are we using it as a tool to help people understand, or are we using it to,
show off?
Yeah, maybe a little bit.
Healy's own writing is a good example of what he's talking about. His article is about a complex topic, but he writes in a clear and engaging way.
Yeah, he uses really vivid language.
Yeah, he does. And even some humor.
It doesn't feel like you're reading a textbook, that's for sure.
Exactly. And it makes you think, maybe effective communication is really about finding that balance, right, between depth and accessibility.
I think that's a great point.
It's like this conversation goes way beyond sociology or even academia.
It's about how we communicate in general.
Exactly. It's relevant to anyone who wants to think about and talk about big ideas.
Whether you're writing or presenting or just having a casual conversation.
Yeah, totally. How you use nuance can make a huge difference.
The goal should always be to help people understand.
Right. Not to make things more complicated.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into nuance, I want to leave you with this. Don't shy away from complexity, but don't be afraid to challenge nuance and demand clarity. Remember that sometimes the most powerful ideas are the ones that are expressed in a simple and elegant way.
Well said. Sometimes simplifying is the key to really diving deep. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.